Hi, welcome back to my podcast channel. This is Chip LoCoco. Very excited about today's topic. The title is New Orleans, More Italian Than You Might Think. Our guest is Vincent Liberto, a New Orleans native and the administrator of one of the largest Facebook pages in Louisiana dedicated to Italian Americans. Welcome, Vincent.
Thank you, Chip. It's really great to be here. I'm glad to be with you this morning. Can't think of a more pleasant way to spend a Saturday morning than being with Chip LoCoco.
This past January, Travel and Leisure did a special edition on the most European cities in America. New Orleans was in their ranking. They stated, settled by the French, turned over to the Spaniards, then passing back through French hands before landing in America's lap, New Orleans might be the most outwardly European city in the nation. Its architecture, food, music, language, and even pace of life reflect the immense French and Spanish influence. Now, I do agree with their statement that New Orleans is outwardly one of the most European cities in America. I think what the statement fails to really take into account, though, is the different groups, other than the French and the Spanish, who all had such an immense role in forming that cultural melting pot of New Orleans. One such group, and that's the group we're going to talk about today, are the Sicilians. If you found yourself in the French Quarter between 1900 and 1930, the French Quarter was filled with the faces and voices of Sicily. So, Vincent, I would like to ask you some questions about the history of the Sicilians here in New Orleans, and we'll kind of just start with what brought them here.
All right, well, Chip, there was always a notable, not by any means, like in comparison to what came in the late 19th century, but there was a definite and sure presence of Italians. There was the consul. There was like a representative of Italy here in New Orleans, because New Orleans was all a port city, a cosmopolitan city, world-class city, especially before the Civil War.
So, Vincent, you're talking around 1830s, 1840s.
Yeah, exactly.
There was a large Italian component of New Orleans.
Well, it was notable. You'd say, if you said New Orleans, you'd say French, you'd say, German, you'd say this and that, but definitely Italians would be in there. And they weren't like, they were kind of like wealthy, not wealthy, but they were good class people. So,
and then of course most people will realize around 1880, 1890 was all of a sudden this huge explosion of mostly Sicilians coming to New Orleans.
Yeah, but I want to give you the guy's name too, because you're a baseball player.
Okay.
The guy, the big consulate in the the early part of the 19th century, his name was Torre, like Joe Torre.
Oh, there you go.
And there was a big shipping king too. There was always, there was shipping things from Italy to here, believe it or not. And I think it was like stuff like, fruit. I know Latin America had it, but there was shipping goods from Italy straight to New Orleans, because there was the cotton farmers and the people like that. I know I'm biased, but I really feel like Italians are the best at everything. You have the best leather, the best automobiles, best clothes, and they wanted those. They didn't want cars back then, but they wanted these great Italian products that Italy had in high quality. And so you had a guy like Torre who was shipping the boom, 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 and it was like a direct. Of course, in Palermo later when the thing broke, it was straight from Palermo straight to New Orleans. Can you imagine?
So, Vincent, you would say that the port was one of the main reasons why New Orleans had such this impact from Italy.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's move ahead.
Geographically, it's just, not so much now with air and all that, but back then, geographically, it was like, if you don't mind me quoting a Jesuit missionary, Francois Xavier, Charlevoix, French, he said that this place is going to be like a Paris. Because of its geography, the port, perfect distance from the river up to the Gulf, and then, the influx all the way to this big United States, America.
So I'm going to move forward ahead to, like I said, to 1880, 1890. All of a sudden, there's this huge explosion from Sicily of immigrants coming to New Orleans. What was why did they come, I guess, is the question.
Right after the Civil War, of course, slave labor was gone, and they had all the sugar cane. They had all kinds of things that they needed. They needed the field, and they say that I don't know. Would you say the climate's about the same? I don't know if
it is. It's pretty close to Sicily, yes.
But and two, here's the thing too. It's the total American dream, as anybody might think. In Sicily, they really had nothing. They were nobodies. They just like were dirt poor. They still had no respect from the north, and there was that they had these like northern Italians, the mainlanders who. I mean, I don't know if we know this enough, but they just like absolutely just hated the Sicilians for whatever reason. Because I think they were just so inbred that, Sicily was conquered by this and that and, the Muslims and Turks and all this and everybody. But of course, I think that's why our women are so beautiful. They're just a mix of all kinds of races and people. So, the Italians in the north were kind of more pure. That's my understanding of it. And they were controlling the Sicilians. So they really had nothing. They had no jobs, really. Just, peasant farmers.
And I believe the northerners would always refer to the Sicilians as la terra, meaning of the earth.
Right.
They were looked down upon. Of course, Sicily itself was having famine. It was corrupt.
Yeah.
The rise of the mafia.
Oh, yeah.
So people were looking for a way out, and all of a sudden the call came from Louisiana, who was looking for workers, and the Sicilians answered that call, correct?
And they made it, I mean, the trip over wasn't easy, but they made it as easy as convenient for them as they could. They had nothing. A lot of times what would happen, check this out, this is kind of interesting. A portion of them would work here seasonally, can you imagine? Way back then, they would work, and then when the crops were done, they would go back to Sicily, and then they'd go back, and they would go by themselves a lot of times. And then there's the old story they would send them over. It was amazing how. I remember one time I had this conversation with you, and it's really stuck with me. And I said, "Why are Italians so good at everything?" And you just said one word: passion. And I really believe that, passion. But even back then, they were just so good at saving money. Living on top of the store, even, there's a tradition of that. You're living close to where you work. And, sending money back, just like a lot of immigrants do today. And then sending for the rest of the family. And just working really hard. They really wanted to be somebody. I think the Catholic faith had something to do with it, too.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that. You mentioned about the trip over being difficult. I came across a article in the Times-Democrat, which was a New Orleans newspaper back then, dated October 9th, 1903. The title was Sons of Sunny Italy, and it was Coming of Strangers to a Strange Land. It was regarding the steamer Manila, which had just arrived from Sicily, and this is what the gentleman writing the article wrote. As they leaned over the side of the big steamer, gazing with longing and curious eyes at the shore, so near and yet so far, they present a wonderful sight to the one to whom such scenes are unfamiliar. Many of these people have perhaps never before been more than a few miles away from their native homes in Italy, and to take the long and weary journey of thousands of miles across the Atlantic Ocean has seemed to them a marvelous undertaking, and indeed it is. Some of the strangers have relatives in this country, scattered from coast to coast. Others have none. They come here, many without friends or money, not knowing where they will go, and perhaps not caring, borne forward by unconquerable desire to come to this great and beautiful country. For years, they have been saving up in their little purses the pittances which they have received for their labor in foreign lands, preparing for the one supreme event, the journey across the Atlantic to the New World, and the purpose has lived before their eyes in vague dreams and in confidential whispers with their fathers, mothers, and sweethearts. It is a colossal undertaking. For years and years, they have looked forward to this great journey, saving and scrimping, putting by little, they have at last laid up sufficient to pay for the steerage passage to this country.
That's beautiful. Yes, it was a difficult trip.
So, Vincent, how many Sicilians came during that, let's call it the explosion of Sicilian immigrants to New Orleans?
It was roughly about 300,000 between 1880 and about 1900.
300,000?
That's right.
Probably next to New York and Chicago. We were probably one of the I guess the one city that had the most Sicilian immigrants, correct?
Yeah, we even had more than New York at one point. We hit more than New York. Can you imagine? And it's about 4 Superdomes.
So when they came here, where did they mostly settle?
Oh, definitely in the quarter. It was centered around the quarter. They came here a lot of times to farm, but they got into pasta making and fruit stands and this and that. But it's important to note, I think, that they went all over the city. You know, there was North Kenner, which was a real farming area. It was kind of convenient. It was nearby. You know, they would even.
So you mentioned
before this is over, I want to talk about Shreveport,
right?
And because they would come from Shreveport, all the way from Shreveport. Can you imagine, to sell their stuff at the French market on a regular basis?
I mean, look at Independence, Louisiana.
Yeah,
all those places, colony of that.
Yeah.
So they came here, and like you said, they came here to farm. Yet that wasn't what they ended up doing the whole time, correct?
Yeah, but I mean, I want to be clear. You know, a lot of them did farm. I mean, if you traced your family back and my family back, there's a strawberry thing in Tickfaw, at least in my family. Some division ended up doing that. That's what they I don't know, trained to do, but that's what they did in Sicily as much as they could, and they did it here, and the soil was rich,
And then some of them, of course, started opening fruit stands in the French Quarter. And they had macaroni factories. They had wine stores and the
olive
oil. And the French and restaurants, and eventually the French Quarter became just a as they called it, the Little Palermo.
Yeah, Little Palermo. It was just amazing. It shows you what the value of hard work, no matter what field endeavor you do. So, like if you suck a lemon long enough, it becomes an orange kind of thing. It's like no matter what you do, if you put a heck of a lot of effort into it and passion, like you say, it's going to turn out good.
Now, of course, life wasn't easy for an immigrant in New Orleans, particularly for the Sicilians. They were despised by the Northern Italians when they're back in Sicily. Right. They were not very well accepted here in New Orleans to begin with. Is that correct? Human
nature. It's the newcomer, the new kid on the block, and that's why Matthew 25, Jesus says, "Welcome the stranger." Jesus gives us another hard thing to do. It's not easy to welcome the stranger sometimes.
I want to bring up a certain date, and that's March 14th of 1891. Oh. Can you explain kind of what happened on that date and what did it mean to the Sicilian people?
Right, Chip. It's a total circus. It was just a total circus. Hennessy gets shot. Some guy.
And David Hennessy was who?
The police chief?
The police chief of New Orleans.
Right. Police chief. He gets shot. Some guy hears him say in his dying breath, "Dagos." Like the Dagos did it, And, when you're dying, who knows what you're saying? And who can even hear it? So, anyway, there's a trial, right? Basically, the 11 guys like Macheca and all them get off scot-free.
They were acquitted by the
exactly. The next day, it's just to show the hate and this cannot happen. Sort of like, it'd be sort of like the OJ trial, maybe. It's such a circus.
A circus.
Yeah, like the OJ trial. So they say, this can't be. You're even getting off. So 5,000 people show up at the statue of Henry Clay, which is still around today. It's across the street from Gallia Hall, but back then it was on Canal Street. 5,000 people show up, and they just charge wherever they are, but they're still being held, I guess, in the jail, and they lynch them. And it's the largest lynching, I think, ever on North American soil, something like that, because it was 11 guys at once.
So 11 Sicilians were lynched that day.
If it's not the biggest, it's just a huge circus.
I know from the historical facts, of course, the American press was very supportive of the lynchers and against the Italians at that point. What kind of changed relative to that story, though? What changed the
I'm eager to point out, because it kills me, because I love Teddy Roosevelt. I love his spirit and his Americanism and his everything about him. But it was disappointing to hear that Teddy Roosevelt himself said, "Oh, I'm not exactly something to the effect of, I'm not exactly sure what happened, but I'm sure it's a good thing that that they got lynched." So, yeah, what happened, the fallout from that was that Italy got involved because it was almost started a war or something. Like Italy was like, how could they do this, these Americans, to us? And so it almost started a war. And they got involved, with what the president, or there was some kind of interaction between the two. That's the bottom line. I mean, the story gets complicated. It takes different twists and turns.
And of course, the famous saying was always, "Who killed the chief?" Correct. That was the way that they kind of summarized the entire story. And I think with the Italian government getting involved, eventually the tide changed, and it became much more sympathetic to the Italian plight relative to the killing of the chief. Correct?
Oh, definitely, most definitely. But there's some kind of conspiracy there. When you think it's some kind of like.
Yes, there's a lot more to the story. I think you summed it up best when you said the whole thing was a circus.
Yeah, and it really gets complicated over time. I hope, like just me and you together here today can sort of boil it down so people understand it a little better. That's the bottom line. Is exactly as we described it. It was so unfair. There's no way around it. And just recently there was a apology that the city of New Orleans.
Yes, they did. That's correct.
Mayor Cantrell got there and. Which really meant a lot. She sort of apologized for that. All these years later. Fascinating.
So let's move on to the impact that the Sicilians brought to the cultural life of New Orleans. And let's really just talk about the traditions that those Sicilian immigrants kept when they came here, and it really blossomed in the city of New Orleans. So Vincent, what do you have to say about some of the traditions that
Chip,
they brought?
I think the traditions are manifested. The traditions we manifest are manifestations of the best of the human species, the best of the human spirit. You know what I'm saying? Things that really matter in life. Italians they want to like consume. Oh, we got like a little money now. Let's get the big car and all this. I mean, they did eventually. Some of the most wealthiest did, but that's just natural. But things like family is a huge deal for them. A Sunday dinner, go to mass and then you come home, you get that good spaghetti. My family had it every Sunday, and it's just a tremendous.
Too.
I know every Sunday.
Every Sunday.
I think it's gone now, though. Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, I think it is. But I think I can't imagine not having that when I was a child.
I know.
It was such a unique thing.
And your mom was French, wasn't she?
My mother was French. One of my favorite stories is that when my Italian grandmother, my dad brought her to go meet her, and she looked at my mother, and her words were Americana.
Oh, that's great.
But that was like, and look, my great grandparents. I didn't know my great grandfather because he passed away before I came along. But my great grandmother was still alive. She only spoke Italian.
That's fantastic.
It's just one of those things. But I agree, Sunday dinners was huge. I think the Catholicism, they were a very Catholic country with Sicily. New Orleans was a very Catholic city. So I think it was a great melting, a perfect fit for the Sicilians when they got here. And they were able to take those Catholic traditions. One of the most, I'd say, famous ones was back in Sicily, they had a huge famine. And the Sicilians prayed to Saint Joseph.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, the heavens opened up and it rained, and they immediately created altars in order to celebrate Saint Joseph. Those altars came over on Saint Joseph's Day into New Orleans, and I know across the city, there are some places that do a phenomenal job with those altars.
And it's kind of making a comeback, I think.
It is. I agree.
And it's because it's a wonderful thing. What could be better? What under the sun could be better than a St. Joseph altar? All that good food, spiritual connection to. It's just fantastic.
Well, wait. You said food, so let's jump into the impact of the Sicilians had on food in New Orleans.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, a fusion of the best of both worlds. I mean, all these great flavors coming in from all over the world, fused with great flavors that came from Sicily, which had already been there. And, I mean, they couldn't help but get a fantastic product out of that,
So Italian restaurants,
Muffaletta is probably the poster child of New Orleans Italian food.
And then I'm correct that got its start at Central Grocery.
Right.
Of course, I will just say perfected at. My favorite is at Napoleon House, just because that's my.
I love that. That's a good choice.
That was my. I always would go to Napoleon House and have myself a muffalata.
Impostado.
My wife, though, swears by Central Grocery, so
really?
it's a debate in my family.
Yeah. And the thing about Napoleon House, it's such a New Orleans atmosphere. You know, I mean, you're sitting in a courtyard just like they did 100 years ago. You know.
Now, if we're going to talk about food, there's one place that I do have to mention, and that, of course, is that as a child, I remember going to eat pizza over at Venetian.
Yeah.
And then walking down the street.
Right.
To
Brocados.
Over 100 years old.
Unbelievable.
Owned by the same family.
Still around.
And it's basically a gelato, ice cream, pastries, cassata, and the world famous cannolis.
Oh my!
Do you like the bigger ones or you like the small ones?
Oh, I like all of them. I'll take both. Thank you, both. I'll take this side of the menu.
One aspect that I wanted to touch upon was the impact that the Sicilians had on music here in New Orleans. Would you care to talk about that a little bit, Vincent?
Yeah, whether it's not whatever it is, the jazz started. The father of it all is Nick LaRocca. I think that anybody could agree on that. Nick LaRocca started New Orleans jazz, Dixieland, more like a Dixieland thing. He was a fantastic horn player. And then you got Winnie Manone, Pee Wee Spitaglaro. My own uncle, Roy Liberto, was a jazz musician in the French Quarter. And it all culminated, like the Mount Rushmore of it all would certainly be incomplete without Louis Prima. Louis Prima was unabashedly, unapologetically Italian, and not just Italian, but New Orleans Italian. The words he used, was like words that my grandmother would use. You know what I'm saying? With Keely Smith and all of that. And, he found Sam Butera. Louis went to Jesuit, believe it or not, and got kicked out maybe 4 to 8 weeks before graduation. He was very sorry about that. It had something to do with one of the Jesuit priests, the scholastics or whatever. I think he mouthed off to him or something along those lines. But Sam Butera, his saxophone player that you always see in the background, it was great. I mean, more than the background, but he discovered him sort of on Airline Highway, and he went to Holy Cross. So, I mean, as a Jesuit Holy Cross thing, I can't help but mention. But and then they went to Vegas and in New York and all these different places. And it's just incredible. His son, Louis Prima Jr., and his daughter, Lena Prima, are active in it today, keeping that memory alive.
They are. I love Lena's show. We see it at the hotel she plays at all the time, in the Montleon Hotel, and it's in the Carousel Bar. And it's a great show. Wow. One thing about the Sicilians, which most people, non-Sicilians, don't know about, is the benevolent societies that sprung up pretty quickly There's so many of them, which is unbelievable. Why don't you talk a little bit about those societies? Oh, man.
This is like the structure that really kept them together. And I think this was just amazing. It was sort of like, the times were so hard that they would take care of each other. When somebody died, they would make sure that they were buried, had a proper burial, which was, goes out of Catholicism, respect for the body. And you chip in a few dollars every week, a month, or whatever. And, they're still there today, the mausoleums. And it was a benevolent society. They would do different things. There were social gatherings. There were parades. Like in Canada, there's the St. Rosalie. The benevolent societies would go to that. But, there was like 20 mausoleums that the Italians have. With all respect to Chinese or Germans, they might have 1 or 2, but to show you the difference, 1 or 2 compared to 20, I mean, it's a big difference there. And it really did a lot to keep the Italians together, and it shows how they took care of each other. Times were so hard that, even Mother Cabrini, comes across the ocean, got on a boat with her sisters there, and started the orphanage because, they just wanted to take care of the Italians and make sure that things were, incredible, raging. She had a raging heart of charity, and that's why she's the first Americanized. In other words, she's the first American saint. That's because she was from Italy, but she changed her national. I mean, she dual citizenship.
She was the first U.S. citizen to be canonized as a saint.
Right, just 1946, something like that.
That is correct. And her Francis Xavier Cabrini was her name, and she founded Cabrini High School.
Right, which is right there, still there today. It started as an orphanage. If you go on Esplanade Street, it says Asylum. You know what's cool about that? Is she always chose like the beautiful areas for the kids. You know, and she was able to get. She was a strong woman, but she wasn't like a tough, uncharitable type woman. She was tough without being mean kind of thing. And she'd get like this money, from a Mr. Pizzatti, who was, again, the shipping captain. There's a lot of money to be made shipping. And he said, prepare the ground and I'll pay for it, basically, and we'll put it there. And, that building on Esplanade, she shows you her great taste, She had a hand in that. And it's Italianate architecture on the
and I think they have preserved her room in the.
It's amazing
at the school.
You can see the bed where she slept in. A saint of the church slept in that bed right there. Walk those grounds. Just they have a habit too. They have like a little museum, and you just think about the heart that raged underneath that habit. And then like if you go to a place like St. Louis. And their cathedral is unbelievable. It's like they have more mosaics in the St. Louis, Missouri cathedral than there are in Ravenna, Italy. And they've got a mosaic of Mother Cabrini there. And it's unbelievable. It's huge.
Well, I think we talked about the Catholicism and the way that the Sicilians really, it was a perfect fit for them. I would be remiss if I didn't mention St. Mary's Italian Church in the French Quarter, right next to Ursuline Convent, because that was the lifeblood of Sicilians. That really was where, yes, we have the cathedral on Jackson Square, but the Italians went to St. Mary's Italian for their masses. Correct?
Right. There was a lot of boxing that went on there too. There's a lot of pugilism.
Well, Vince, I got to say, this has been a great morning talking to you about the Sicilians. I want to ask you just a few final questions. Number one, where does the Liberto clan hail from over in Sicily?
Oh, definitely Cefalù. My grandmother on the other side.
And what was her maiden name?
Danina. But she married a wheel, W-E-H-L, who's German and Jewish, so I'm 75%. I treasure the little bit of German and Jewish that I have, and French, but largely from Cefalù and Contessa Antolina, and these places about the size of Metairie, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
But Contessa Antolina is, they're not big, and a lot of Italians will say that they're from Palermo, but that's where the port was.
Correct. Yeah, my family, I had the LoCocos and the Tumanellos. That's the two on my dad's side of the family, and they hail from Monreale and Cefalù as well.
Yeah.
So
the whole area is really kind of interesting. You could tell if you give somebody a last name, some people can tell you, oh, that's a Ustica name, or that's a Cefalù name, or you see what I'm saying?
Correct.
Depending on the part.
So I know you're the administrator of a Facebook page dedicated to Italian Americans. Can you give me the name of that Facebook
It's
group?
called New Orleans Italians on Facebook. New Orleans Italians. Just go to Facebook and go to
How
New
many
Orleans
subscribers
Italians.
do you have now on that?
16.3 thousand. It's 16,000. So it's huge.
That's huge.
But it shows you to me, it's a manifestation of people wanting to come together as Italians, and that their Italian heritage means a lot to them, Chip.
Well, Vincent, I want to thank you so much for coming this morning. I thought, like I said, I had a great time speaking with you, and I hope our listeners learned a little bit about the Sicilians who came over to America, and particularly into New Orleans.
Yeah, thank you, Chip. This was a fantastic time. I think it was very insightful. Thank you.
Ciao.
Ciao.